I began working on this process by prepping the softening tools that I would needed to soften the elk hide. So I started by preparing the staking tool, and here I am creating a bevel to create a sharper surface area to soften the hide with. And this stake is going to go into the ground, and I'm going to take the hide and rub it in between it so that it gets nice and can work and stretch it out, and by putting a lot of my body weight into it. And I even finished up with using a sander just to make it a little more smooth so it wouldn't puncture any holes in the hide. Then I had to dig a hole quite deep to get it in there good enough so that it would be stable, because I'm going to be putting a lot of weight on there, and started tamping it down just to give it even more extra security there. Here I am started preparing the egg tanning solution. I'm going to do one last final one, and just to increase the potency of the solution, I decided to put less water in this time and allow it to really soak in as much final time as I can before I start really softening it. I had to soak the hide and let the magic happen, and tomorrow the big day starts. And here I'm working, just kind of stretching out the hide into it a little bit, trying to get it all in that good stuff, and just let it sit for overnight. Nothing too long. And the big day is upon us. The first step was to pull the hide out of the water, out of the tanning solution there, and wring it out. Like in my previous video, that was something that I showed quite a bit of, is wringing out the hide. And with this one, I really took particular time to make sure it was as wrung out as possible, because it is I had limited sunlight and heat to work with, so I was trying to make it as efficient as possible. Holes to sew up. So what I did was just did these really fast. This is probably the most successful sewing job I've done, in the sense that I did not get perfectionistic with it. I didn't spend 3 hours trying to sew the holes. I just sewed them up real quick, as efficiently as I could. But at this point too, I already knew the tension of the hide and everything, but there was only a couple there that weren't too big, so it went pretty smoothly. And next, I started on the staking tool. So starting the staking tool, I'm working the edges as much as I possibly can at the get-go. Those are the thinnest parts of the hide, so those are going to start thinning out way before all the other parts, and just kind of rubbing it back and forth. And at this point, I've just been keeping it in the shade. I just want to get a feel for where the hide was at, where all of the moisture levels were at, and also kind of trying to stretch out the midsection just a little bit, but not really too focused on that. Mostly just trying to get those edges as worked as I possibly can, just to get them going. And all of the nervousness, anticipation, and hard work pretty much led up to these final moments or this final day of softening, and this really amazing process where you're stretching out the hide and basically creating the leather in a final kind of sense. And one major lesson I learned from this softening process was, and not from previous times, was the importance of balancing drying the hide while stretching and abrading the hide at the same time. So, also just a side note, the steel cable is kind of my answer to not having a community of people around me to help, stretch this hide out, because traditionally, or in indigenous cultures across the world, this process is always done with people, usually always done with people stretching it out together, especially with these larger heights. It's very difficult to do this by yourself, but because we have the modern conveniences of going to Home Depot or wherever, Lowe's, I was able to get this steel cable, and this was pretty much most of where the work happened. I would go back and forth between the staking tool, which was in the shade most of the day, and the steel cable, but the steel cable is where I primarily stayed because of the sunlight, and the sunlight really was quite intense. It was a hot day. It was about 89 degrees, and I really needed to maximize my time in the sun, because, as I was saying earlier about the drying process is, I found, to be almost as important as the actual stretching process. They're both extremely important, but I've stretched deer hides for 12 hours in almost no sunlight or any heat source, and it took that long because it was cold and it was not a good time. So the fact I was able to do this elk hide, which is way thicker, it takes way longer to dry, and in this way where it was kind of a combination of leaving it out to dry a little bit and then really working it and just checking the areas, feeling it. At a certain point, I really had to wrap my fingertips with tape. I just kind of did this improv because my hands were getting destroyed. I was not able to really keep up with the abrasion that happens if you grip the hide a certain way, where the hide is in contact with your fingertips and you're trying to stretch it out. It abrades them and it just tears them raw. So I ended up using a lot of tape, like medical tape, just kind of protect my hands. This process was also extremely physically demanding. As you can imagine, it's just a lot of physical labor, and it was most of the physical pain was in my hands, actually. It was just so much grip strength just the entire time, and it was very, very intense. And as I said, this process was a lot of going back and forth between working the cable, work that for a little bit. I would get exhausted on that, and then I would hang it up on the ringing rack, and I would abrade it with the braiding stone, and then I would go to the softening, to the staking tool, and I just kind of did that circuit. And I kind of also, later on, I was doing a lot of kind of trying to do these kind of more larger hide stretches where I would kind of wrap it up and almost do a deadlift to try and stretch the hide as much as I could, just the entire body. This time I really took care to provide self-care for myself during this process. So I actually did take a lunch break. I did take breaks. I just left the hide in the shade, take a break a little bit, take a rest, drink water, and then maybe, go back to it, and I even had a dinner break too. But I ended up, started at about 10 and it ended about 11 p.m. So it's wasn't definitely an all day task, but it wasn't like how I've done hides in the past where I just barreled through doing only stretching, crazy stuff all day and then not taking any breaks. So I really had to kind of mind my body and take that into consideration as well. So eventually, as the sun set and the air started to cool down, I had to stretch the hide out inside. Trying to stretch it out outside, even with the sun setting, the temperature was dropping down to about 70. You feel the cool air coming in, from the humidity was rising, so I didn't want to lose any progress on what I was doing. So I ended up moving inside and had a little small heater to have a heat source that I could put up against the hide up against and do kind of a final stretching. It was so close. It was so close to being done, but I ended up just kind of doing it that way to speed along the process and make it go, as to try and at least finish it by that day. And at one point, I even ended up I was doing a lot of hand stretching, just trying to get it to stretch by hand. And at a certain point, I ended up actually putting a plunger on the ground that was new. It was not used, thankfully. And just using that as kind of as a improv staking tool. It was a little bit flimsy, but it did work. It was not as secure as it could have been, but it definitely did work for my purposes. And same thing, I was just really trying to work the parts. Mostly it was the neck area at this point to have the most amount of work in drawing, but it was a little stinky. It was definitely really hot, and I was thoroughly exhausted. But at the next day, I once it was finished, I just folded up the hide, left it there, and then the next morning I woke up and checked on it, and it was beautiful. It felt so good. And after all those hours of work, I finally have a soft, supple elk hide. And some of the areas of the elk hide became stiff, but there were areas I was expecting to go stiff because I was not able to scrape those areas as well. And also there are areas that the smoke did not penetrate during the pre-smoking process. And they're also the toughest areas around the neck as well. But I feel very thankful to have been able to do this project, and thank you for watching. And please consider donating to the Tataviam Land Conservancy. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching.